to... Hello, welcome to the virtual open day at the Faculty of Theology and Religion here in Oxford. We're really sad that you can't visit in person, but we're delighted that you can be with us here on this live stream online, and we're grateful for all the questions. A few points of housekeeping first. If you would like to ask a question, which we will try and answer during the next hour as part of this stream, if you scroll to the bottom of the Virtual Open Days webpage, next to the video that you're now watching, there is a live stream Q&A Slido room, a sort of box for typing questions in. Any questions going in there, I should see, if not straight away, then as soon as I look to my left like that. So do type your questions in there. Any questions that we don't get to answer during the hour, I will try and type answers to and leave up for the rest of the day. I think let's start by introducing everyone. I'll go first. I'm Mary Marshall. I am the Director of Undergraduate Studies and Outreach at the Faculty of Theology and Religion. I also coordinate admissions for the faculty, and I'm a college tutor at St Benet's Hall. So I see the admissions process from lots of different angles. Darcy, would you like to go next?
Thank you, Mary. Hi, everyone. Lovely to meet you. My name's Darcy. I study philosophy and theology, so that's the joint honours. So I'm part of the Faculty of Philosophy and the Faculty of Theology and Religion. And I've just finished my second year at St Peter's College.
Right, and I'm Dave, and I teach philosophy in Oxford, and I'm the equivalent of Mary's role in terms of coordinating admissions and doing schools liaison work, but from the philosophy faculty. And philosophy in Oxford is only ever studied with other subjects. So philosophy and theology is one of the 8 different joint degrees that we have involving philosophy in Oxford. Theology and religion, in spite of the "and," is really a sort of what we call a single honours degree, and you'll learn a bit more about that in the next hour. But philosophy and theology, as Darcy has said, is a joint degree across 2 faculties of the university, on both of which actually I'm a member, so I see that degree from both sides as well.
Thank you, Dave. Virtual Open Day is very busy for someone involved with 8 different courses and lots of different faculties. It's a good place to start, realising that I'm outnumbered by philosophers. We've had some questions. Why did you choose to study the course? And I wonder, Darcy, that's probably a fresher memory for you. Why did you choose philosophy and theology? And you might say generally, and then why philosophy and theology in particular? Something about the joint course that you enjoy.
I think Oxford was the perfect place for me because I already have a tough time narrowing down choices, and the joint honours was the perfect thing for me because I couldn't see myself doing philosophy by itself, and I also couldn't see myself doing theology by itself because I really was interested in the 2 disciplines, and having the choice to combine them was something that really pulled me to Oxford. And So I really, like, when I saw the degree, I knew this was for me. I'm really interested in, fundamental questions about the world, why the world works, why we think the way we do, why people have certain religious inclinations or not, what other thought process people have had historically. And that was something that I enjoyed, studying English at A-level, studying history. But I thought that philosophy and theology was a really different way at looking at all of those questions, which, are done in so many subjects. And I was just pulled to that way of thinking. And when I looked at the options available, which I highly recommend you all to do watching the live stream, if you're considering studying here, I saw that I was able to potentially learn a language, but then I also saw I could learn, different world religions really deeply. And I saw that further down the course, I had the option to write a thesis where I can really focus in and onto something where I'm interested in. So I'm writing about God and the theatre right now for my thesis, and that's combining my extracurricular interest with my, my subject interest. And I saw that I was able to study liberation theology and feminist theology, which is, as I've gotten into my degree, I've realized I'm really interested in, political theology and those who are oppressed and why. particularly with, things going on in the world and my own, internal dialogue with myself and realizing stuff in the world. So I've seen that the course just really opened me up to many different things. And I have friends who are really interested in, historical and doctrinal stuff, and they love reading about the New Testament, and there are options in that as well. So I think the course is incredible because it gives you a massive range of things to consider. And for people who potentially aren't good at making choices in terms of narrowing something down very deeply, I really recommend the Joint Honours School.
Thanks, Darcy. Before I chip in and say some things about the single course Theology and Religion and Oriental Studies, I wonder, Dave, whether you have anything to add from a point of view of making a decision about philosophy and theology as opposed to the other two.
Well, I don't particularly want to get into a virtual dispute with Darcy, but if you've ever been in one of those restaurants where you're presented with a menu with hundreds and hundreds of choices, and you're the kind of person who finds it difficult to make your mind up, it might not be the best thing for you, because you might spend forever making your mind up. It sounds like Darcy's actually got a very clear sense of what she wants to do in this. In philosophy, I started out in philosophy and mathematics. What got me interested in philosophy was really very abstract questions, the sort of things that Darcy was talking about at the beginning. And I think if things get a little bit too practical, I go and have a cold shower and lie down until the feeling goes away. So I'm that kind of philosopher. But I did a couple of years of philosophy and maths and then transferred to philosophy and theology. And that's what my first degree eventually was in as well. But the questions that interest me are the more abstract philosophical questions, rather than perhaps the more directly relatable kind of political questions. So we're looking at philosophy from rather different ends.
As we'd expect from philosophers, there has to be some level of argument and debate. I'll say a few things about theology and religion generally, picking up from the very excellent advice which Darcy gave, which I would convey to anyone who's watching this live stream, even if it's only because you happen to be in the same room as the person who's really watching it, and what you actually want to do is maths. And that is, no matter what you apply for at university, make sure, maths is a very fine subject, of course, Dave, make sure that you do your research and make your decision based on the actual course content, what will actually be covered, what is actually taught as part of that course at the institution that you're considering applying to. Do not base your decisions on what a course is called, because philosophy, theology, religion, history, English, even physics and engineering mean different things to different people in different institutions and on different courses. And so it's really important that you take that advice you've been given by Darcy and go and find information about course options. It's there on the faculty websites. There are links at the bottom of the Virtual Open Days webpage. If you go to the FAQs link, you can find further links to comprehensive information on course content there. You've got lots of time now. It's only July. You have lots of time. Do your research and make some informed decisions. Because, for example, many thinkers who a lot of people consider to be philosophers, you might find don't really feature on philosophy degrees, but do feature in the theology and religion part of the degree in Oxford. Figures like Kierkegaard, for example, who's a very popular thinker. Lots of applicants express an interest in him, but if you want to study him, you'd be studying him in theology and religion, not in philosophy. That's not saying anything especially about Kierkegaard. It is saying a little bit about the way that Oxford University structures itself. So the message is go and find out what's in the course, wherever you're applying, whatever your course is, and make that decision from a point of view of information. I'm not forgetting the religion and Oriental studies applicants who are out there. Welcome to you. Religion and Oriental studies, this is quite an easy question to answer. You should consider this degree if you are passionate about languages and about accessing primary sources in their original language. That makes up half of your course. If that's what you want to do, if you want if you are thrilled by the idea of picking up a language from scratch and using it to access the primary sources of some key religious traditions, Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, Eastern Christianity, then religion and Oriental studies is a very rewarding degree for you. And again, find out about that course information, go to the FAQs. Right, Dave and Darcy, moving swiftly on. You won't be surprised, I imagine, if I tell you that several of the questions that we've been getting are about interviews. Interviews are something that people worry quite a lot about, so why not let's deal with that first, the elephant in the room. Dave, might you start off by telling us what you think an interview is about? What is an interview like?
So what it's like and what it's about. Well, what it's like is going to be different this year, possibly from what Darcy experienced, because Darcy, I guess you were interviewed live in a room with real, or at least they may have been zombies, but they were sort of in the place that tutors would ordinarily be. This year, like last year, interviews will be roughly like this, actually. They'll be on a screen because we're going to have to interview everybody through this kind of medium, through Teams or Zoom or some kind of platform anyway. And that's going to make this year's interviews a little bit different for pretty much everybody from what they would ordinarily have experienced. It will be like being in everyday life and then suddenly being precipitated out of everyday life onto a screen for around about 25 minutes, half an hour. That's the sort of duration that an interview will be. It's quite likely that you'll get a couple of interviews at one college and then interviews at a second college, and it may be you'll get a couple of interviews at a second or one. It'll depend a bit on whether you've applied for theology and religion or philosophy and theology. Philosophy and theology applicants, my guess is, will typically get probably 4 interviews, and we can find out from Darcy in a bit how she got on. You wouldn't have more than 2 interviews at one college, I think, because of the rules that that we're working under with online interviews. It places schools under a lot of stress in terms of providing resources if we were to interview you more than that. So expect maybe 4 interviews at most across 2 colleges. What will they be like? Well, they'll be an attempt by us to find out how you think. What they will not be is an attempt by us to find out answers to questions. So we will ask you questions, but the answer, frankly, will matter much less to us than the process of thought. And in fact, if we ask really good and deep questions, it may very well be that the conversation could potentially go on for 3 hours. It won't, because 25 minutes or half an hour, and then we've got to move on to the next person. But potentially the questions we will ask will be quite big questions with different angles into them. You will be not tested by your ability to hack your way through to an answer or speculate a guess about what the answer is, but by the process of getting there, by your thinking, by your reasoning. For example, a question that I asked to PPE and psychology applicants, so PPE is philosophy, politics, and economics, to those applicants and to psychology applicants, maybe 8 or 10 years ago, was, is toothpaste a medicine? Is toothpaste a medicine? And you could see that some people were thinking, hang on, we haven't covered that in biology yet, but that really wasn't the point. The point was to think about that question. How would you go about thinking about it? How would you approach the question? What would the sort of definitional bits be? What would the questions that they would provoke be? And that process of thinking, which for a typical applicant might go on for 10 or 12 minutes on that question, would get us all sorts of different directions. People would come up with different answers, but the answer they came up with was much less important than hearing them reason towards the answer. Now, Darcy, I've made some guesses about you. You've probably interviewed live and in person. That was one guess, and at a couple of colleges. So tell us about that.
Yes, so I actually was with Mary. So I was at St. Bennett's Hall for 2 interviews, and then St. Peter's College for 2 other interviews, and I ended up at St. Peter's. And I completely agree with what you said, David. And I just really want to emphasize to people watching that it's true. It's not about the answer you give, which obviously that's important. So don't make anything up. But it's about your thought process and the way in which you think. And that's what the tutors are really looking for. So I really encourage you to talk through what you're going through in your head. And I know they say that for, the maths and physics interviewers when they're going through problem sheets, but it's really the same for humanities subjects as well. Don't just, say an answer, even though the answer may be good. They want to see how you manage to get to that answer, where your brain is going immediately, because that's where the interest lies as well. And if you really consider the tutorial system, which is sort of what the interviews are trying to mimic, tutors want to see why you're thinking in certain ways and why you reason, because that's all in your third year when you're doing your examinations. That's what you're being based off as well, how you get to certain arguments from a particular question. So I'd really encourage you when you're practicing for your interviews to practice, going through an answer and making sure the structure in which you answer it as well can be reasoned and is, clear and is concise as well, because you don't want to waffle. But yeah, I'd really just place an emphasis on what Dave said there. Another thing is, don't try and read into where you're interviewed. I know that can be a temptation, but the main advice is to try your best in every interview you have. If you have one that's a bit of a blip, don't read into it as well, because you may think, gosh, the answers I gave there were terrible, but perhaps your thought process were really good and different to other candidates that the tutor had that day. So really just try and try your best, be consistent, and don't let any blips or negative things affect how you go in your next interviews, because you really, really don't know. And I also would encourage you to really just go with the conversation. Try not to steer things in your direction, because when the interviews are natural and they just flow, that really, really is a good sign. And that, a good tutorial for me is when I have a really deep conversation. I've managed to go into consider lots of different questions and arguments with the tutor, but also when you really deep dive into something, you get into a really narrow path and you feel like you're really engaging on a particular topic. And if you feel like you're at that place, that's a really good sign. And try to just go with what they're steering you towards as well.
Thanks. That's all really great advice. I'm going to try to pick up another question from the chat in relation to that. So just to make sure that it's clear in relation to what we've heard, someone has asked, if given a generalized question at interview, can we analyze it from various religious perspectives, like compare what, for example, Judaism might tell us about the question, and also analyzing the same in the light of Islam or Buddhism? I hope the message that's getting across is that actually your interviews are not going to assume any prior knowledge. That is, they're going to do their best not to assume any prior knowledge of theology, religion, or philosophy. They may well assume some rudimentary general knowledge, but there's never any problem with saying, I don't know what that means, or can you clarify what that is? So it's very unlikely, I would say, I'd be astonished if you walked into an interview and anyone were to ask you, is there life after death? What would a Jew think? What would a Buddhist think? That's not what we're testing. If you're being asked a question, you'll be given either some resources with which to deal with it, or you'll be asked to generate an answer that's based on your own reasoning and your own thoughts. So you do not need to compile for yourself a toolkit of what different religious traditions or different philosophical traditions might say or do. One other word that I've heard in the responses we've heard from Dave and Darcy was this really excellent description: conversation. A tutorial is a conversation. And that means that what you say is only part of it. Another really big part of it is listening. And if you're having a conversation and you're not listening, then that's not a conversation. If you're having an interview and you're not listening, then not only are you probably missing all the cues that interviewers are trying to give you to help bring out your best and show you to greatest advantage, but also you're probably not understanding what you've been asked to do. So it's really important to listen. I think candidates can confuse interviews in three main ways. And that is either they can think they're an interrogation, and so they're going to be interrogated. And if you're going to be interrogated, then the best thing you can do is just button your lip and not say very much, or keep your answers very short, because that way they can't catch you out. Well, it's not an interrogation. So don't keep silent. Don't be afraid to speak. Like Darcy says, show you're working and talk about your ideas. Some students think it's like a sort of debating society where the main aim of the game is to dig your heels in, never change your mind, and regardless of what the interviewer says to you, you never alter your opinion or bring in new ideas. You say, well, this is what I said at the beginning of the interview, and it's still what I say, and I'm not going to listen to anything else. That's also not the way it goes. In a conversation, we move on from where we started. And the third way it can go wrong is if you think it's a performance. Candidates who think it's a performance, who come in and try and wow their interviewer with their erudition and articulate speech and marvelous knowledge of all kinds of things that the interviewer didn't ask them about. It looks very impressive and would be great on television, but it's not what an interview is about. So it's a conversation to try to uncover how you think and to determine your aptitude and your potential as a student on the course, because we also heard a comparison with tutorials there. And tutorials, our main method of teaching, are also conversations. So there's a reason we invite people to interview. How would you prepare for interviews then? Darcy spoke about practicing. Dave, how should we prepare for interviews?
So I was just asked this actually on a sort of Slido Q&A for PPE. How do you prepare? Well, think about what you're going to be doing. What you're going to be doing is talking and listening. And so, get into a mode where you're not thinking about delivering a speech, delivering a monologue. That would be one way in which the interview might go smoothly, but not a good way. As Mary says, that's not kind of the way that we want the interview to go well. You need something to talk about. In our own interviews, we as tutors, as interviewers, will be setting the questions. That's not usually how we'd start a tutorial, because normally it would be your work that the tutorial was about, your essay, your thinking. But here we're going to be driving the agenda for the interview. But we're going to be requiring you to talk out loud about an academic question or about a difficult question in a way that you may very well not be used to doing at school. So the best preparation is talking to someone, either friends or maybe friendly adults, about something that you may be reasonably confident talking about, but just getting used to the sound of your voice and used to a conversation. On the whole, if you live with parents, parents will weary of this. They just will get bored with it and irritated by it. So they are not necessarily your best resource. Grandparents may think well of you, may be, positively inclined towards you, and may not live with you. So grandparents could be exactly the thing. They may not have studied. I mean, you may be studying history. They may never have studied history, but they may actually know a bit of history because they've lived through a bit of it. Have a conversation with them about something they can teach you about, something they can tell you about, and you can get used to asking. So get used to that way of conversing. Tell them about what you've been learning, something you've read, or, so you've read some great book that they may also have read, but they may not have done. Tell them about it. Have a conversation about it. Use the resources around you. It may very well be that teachers will have the opportunity to offer you sessions at school that will go like this. But sometimes they can have very curious ideas about what interviews are about, and maybe not the same as our ideas. They don't think of it as a conversation. They might think of it as getting to an answer. And it'd be interesting to hear whether Darcy had any experience of mock interviewing in that kind of way. But in general, the best way to prepare is talk about something academic, something you've studied. Let somebody else talk to you and ask them questions. Just get used to conversation, because it's something that people often are not very used to doing, except maybe about sport. We might ask you about sport. We're not likely to. One of my colleagues at Brasenose, who's now retired, said, actually, there were lots of people who turn up on those phone-in programs about football who think of themselves probably as not terribly academic, but they could tell you the entire run of Burnley's football results in the 1936-7 football season. It's just there in them. Lots of people have the ability to know facts. It's about what you can do and how you talk about them. Learn to have a conversation, then you'll be exactly where we need you to be. Darcy, what did you do to prepare?
Yeah, completely what you said, Dave. And I think it's, for me, I just tried to have a lot of conversation, and those didn't have to be formal. So, you may hear our live stream and think, gosh, I need to, you know, prepare 3 meetings with my teacher to talk about theology. But no, it can be having lunch with friends, and you say, oh, let's just talk about something academic for 10 minutes just to get in conversation. Or maybe, you're about to go to bed, but you quickly have a chat with a sibling and just talk to them or have a conversation. And it can be very informal, but I think it's more helpful getting consistency and making sure it's regular in your behavior, being comfortable with conversation and being able to bounce off ideas rather than, having to formally set it out. So that's what I did, Dave. I just tried to have frequent conversation. I made sure that I was comfortable in replying, but also comfortable in thinking, because a lot of people try and rush into an answer. But what I tried to do as well was to say, all right, I'm going to give myself 10 seconds to breathe and think, and also just working out how I can breathe and think about what I'm going to say. What is my thought process? So I'm sure, Mary, in our interview, I probably said at 1 second, do you mind if I have a moment to think about this? Or I said, oh, do you mind repeating that question, please? And just being able to really think about what you're being asked rather than dashing into a question. I also think it's quite helpful to practice that as well.
I couldn't agree more with that. I think that's a great idea. And of course, whenever you've said, can I take a few minutes or would you repeat the question? My answer would have been absolutely. Take your time and think about it, because that's what we're all about. So moving from interviews and talking and listening, which we do a lot of in the course, as well as at admissions, to the other side of things, which is the writing. So our students, once they arrive, also write a lot. And I might ask you in a minute, Darcy, about what a typical day it is like for a student. But let's for a moment think about written work as part of the admissions process. So students, whatever course they're applying for, theology and religion, philosophy and theology, religion and Oriental studies, they will need to submit one piece of written work. So I've got a good question here. How should I choose what to submit? And it's fair enough, because actually some people, depending on what subjects they've studied before, and of course this year, depending on what their school experience has been like over the past year or so, are going to have either a lot of essays that they might choose from or not very many. So there are some very simple rules for this. Number one, we're not looking for anything particularly long. So anything more than 2,000 words maximum, you can probably discount from your consideration. So we're looking for, pieces of work up to about 2,000 words. If you've done a longer piece of work like an EPQ, we're happy for you to extract a bit of that and give us a sentence saying what the context of it is. But it's a self-contained piece of writing. The other issues are, what are tutors looking for? Well, tutors are looking for written work that does a number of different things. And I'm going to get it right. You can probably see me looking to my left at the bullet points. We're looking at, and the bullet points are on the FAQs page. There's another plug for that. The ability to think clearly and reason coherently. It's one of the things we're looking for. We're looking for your thinking and reasoning skills at interview, also in writing. So if you've got essays that are purely descriptive, what was the impact of the eruption of Mount St. Helens? That's just a description. You're just going to say what happened. That's not showing your ability to argue That's not showing your ability to reason. Try to submit a piece of writing which has you making a case or making a decision or presenting an analysis, a breakdown, or an argument in relation to something. Evidence of ability to structure work in a logical and coherent way. Is it an essay that has an introduction, goes through a sensible argument that flows and reaches a conclusion? Don't give us bullet points. Don't give us a storyboard. Don't give us a piece of poetry. We're looking for the logical structure of an essay, an argument in written form that should be written clearly and grammatically. So another top tip, read it through, check the spelling, check the grammar, but don't feel, and this is a mistake that many people feel, many current students make as well, don't assume that good writing is flowery writing. Don't assume that if you've written a piece of work which uses straightforward, clear language that everybody can understand and makes your point perfectly lucidly to your reader, that you need to scrap that and write a brand new one in which you don't use any words with fewer than 4 syllables. That's not true. Good writing is clear writing, and the best writing is the clearest writing. And we're also looking for some independence of thought. What does that mean? Well, it's easier to think what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean that you are saying something that everybody in the world disagrees with, and we're not interested in your essay unless you've made some comment that is not going to find general consensus. So, you can write an essay on why you think the moon is made of cheese, but it's probably not a sensible way to go. So that's not what independence of thought means. It also doesn't mean that we expect you to say something or come up with something having had no support. We're actually hoping that you'll be able to submit work that's based on your current or recent studies, probably at school or at college. You're not writing something special. This is our opportunity to see you when you're being supported and writing about something you know. So independence of thought, I think, is another way of getting into that first point of, are we actually seeing you take ownership of this subject and write about it? Or are we seeing you simply copy paste different arguments from different textbooks together and fill up a page? So are you taking ownership of the argument? Are you taking ownership of the writing? Is it your own work? Those are the things we're looking for. What have I not mentioned? I haven't mentioned subject at all. It doesn't need to be on theology, religion, philosophy, ethics. It may be that you're doing A-level religious studies, and if you are, and if those are your best essays, submit them. If your best essay is for A-level English, A-level politics, submit that. We are much more interested in the quality of your writing than we are in the subject that you're writing on. If you are doing all science subjects, saying you don't write essays, or perhaps your most recent essays were written 20 years ago, you will have to write something specially. And for that, you can seek advice from the faculty. There are some ideas for you on the FAQs page. But by and large, we hope that applicants will be able to look at their portfolio of essays they've already written, think about what we're looking for, and pick what fits it best. Darcy, how did you go about choosing what you would submit for your written work?
I just thought about what essays I've written that I really engaged with, and it's, similar to all of the things you said about making sure you're not just being descriptive, making sure there's a clear argument and structure in it. So I just thought to myself, well, and I asked my teacher, what have you read of my work that was a good read? What was interesting to read? What was engaging? But I also did some self-reflection. What did I actually enjoy, reading for and writing about? And, if you do send an essay, and you may even want to talk about it in your interview if you wish, or if the topic comes up, if it's a similar topic, oh, I actually wrote about that on my written work. And because you've engaged in this piece of writing, you're more likely to, enjoy talking about it, or it's probably a better read as well. So I just say simple advice, but think about something you really engage with when reading for it and writing it.
That's good advice, I think. Dave, what have we missed? Have you got anything to add?
Nothing much to add. I think philosophers, unlike theologians, are much less concerned about what the moon is made of. And if I had an essay that convinced me that the moon was made of cheese, then I'd be delighted to see it. I'm a Wallace and Gromit fan, as most of you will be. But that's really not, I think, terribly relevant, because in the philosophy side of philosophy and theology, of course, there's, rather than the written work, we have a test. There's a nice cheesy question coming in my mind that I could set for a test, but maybe I won't do that. So you'd instead be doing on the philosophy side. So for theology and religion, you will be submitting pieces of written work. For philosophy and theology, a piece of written work. On the philosophy side of philosophy and theology, you do a test that lasts an hour, in which we will see some of your writing live and in person. So you'll be doing it in that half hour. I'm guessing, Darcy, that you did that test, or a test. I'm glad that we are socially distanced by internet, because I probably set the test that you did, and therefore you might blame me for it. But maybe that's the moment to actually ask about the test and see how you got on with it, what you made of it, what it's like.
Yeah, whenever people ask me about admissions tests, I tell them you can't prepare in terms of remembering facts. And I think that's the most important thing for people watching now. You can't, read as many theology books or philosophy books you want to and try and regurgitate facts, because that's not what the test is about. The test is about being able to read a source, and engage with so there will be a source section being able to engage with the text, and it's also about how you're able to write essays, and again, this whole thing about your thought process and being able to engage with the question. So the things I did to prepare were look at the previous tests set online. There are only a limited number, probably I think maybe 4 or 5 available. Maybe I'm wrong in saying that, Dave. But the main thing is, don't do 4 in a week, because you will have all the tests finished. Try and space that out a bit before the interviews. But that being said, you may just want to do 2 and not all of the 4, which may be the best thing for you, because you want to sort of have spontaneity and make sure your answers are fresh, and you're not doing 4 tests and you're trying to scribble in the same way you did before. Look at the test with fresh eyes, think about the questions in a different way. And yeah, just try and engage. I think the best thing I could offer for advice is have good sleep, because the more sleep you have, the better you're able to engage with ideas. Remember that you can only try your best, and the main thing is come to the questions with an open mind, and particularly with the source aspect. So when you get the text, read it more than once, and really try and think, what should I be thinking about when I'm reading this? What should I be getting out of this? I don't know if that's on the right lines.
Absolutely. I've just had a quick look, and there are 7 tests currently there. So it's probably the 4 that you saw plus the later ones. So there's plenty of options. And there's also some advice and guidance on how to approach each of the 3 kinds of questions you might meet. So the comprehension question, there's a logic style question usually in the second section, but that's not compulsory. You can do that, or you can do a half-hour essay. And then there's some advice on the half-hour essays as well. So if you go to the university tests page, which is quite easy to find, Oxford University admissions tests will get you to the right bit of the website, then the How Do I Prepare tab has access via a drop down to some of the past papers, and you can have a look at those and try them. Do try them, not least because half an hour to write an essay is really not very long, and you will want to get a feel for how to use that half hour to show your work to best effect.
Thanks. A quick subsidiary question that's come through on Slido. Do we need to provide references in case we take some quotation that better helps in justifying the point? I think this is a question about whether to put references into an essay. Of course, you're very welcome to quote from sources, be they primary sources or secondary sources. If you quote, then it is good academic practice to put that quotation into quotation marks and to say where you've got it from. However, I think it's safe to say that the level of referencing that we would expect, i.e. how you say where it's from, should be equivalent to what you are used to doing either in schoolwork or in exam work. So if you want to quote Aristotle, you can put brackets Aristotle. If you want to quote Peter Vardy, you can put brackets Peter Vardy or Richard Dawkins or whoever. The admissions tutors will be pleased to see you engaging with good academic practice, but you're not going to get in trouble necessarily if we don't see page numbers and publication dates and things like that.
And so, remember that the test is precisely an exam kind of test, and we wouldn't expect to see bibliographies or precise references. If you're just sitting in a room writing a half-hour essay, you shouldn't, under ordinary circumstances, have access to books or dictionaries or really anything. It's your thought that matters. And the questions that I set on the test are deliberately questions designed to test your thinking, not your capacity to draw on material. It's not an extra, not a bonus to us that you can produce, as Hume said this or Descartes said that. That's really not part of the exercise. And if you find yourself doing that in your practices, for example, have a think about whether you're actually doing what's required of you, because what's required of you is to answer the question, not to show off.
Good. It's worth pointing out that if you are a philosophy and theology applicant, you will need to register for that philosophy test, and the registration date is the same day as the UCAS deadline. And the same goes for religion and Oriental studies. If you're hoping to specialize in either Judaism with Hebrew or Islam with Arabic, that's Judaism with Hebrew or Islam with Arabic, then you are required to register for the OLAT, the Oriental Languages Aptitude Test. You are not going to be, don't worry, you won't be presented with a page of Arabic and asked to translate it. That's not the kind of test it is. You can go on to the websites that Dave has just described. The practices are there as well. You also need to register for that test. If you're interested in the single school theology and religion, there is no admissions test. So far, we've taken ourselves from the UCAS deadline onwards. Let's think about what's happening between now and then. And I think that the task that's looming for most visitors is the personal statement. Darcy, how long did it take you? How did you go about it? Can you remember your personal statement? Is that an unkind question?
I can remember. I think the main thing with my personal statement was, and the hard thing as well, because everybody is applying to university, right? And particularly people going for your subject, can be very easy to think, what are they writing? What are they doing? And want to compare. But the thing that I remember doing, and the best thing I chose to do, was thinking, what am I interested in myself? What do I enjoy reading in my spare time? What are the sort of, because when things were open, I would always, and I'm from London, so I'd go to random lectures at UCL, and I'd go to random talks that I could find on Eventbrite. And I had to ask myself, what are the sort of things I'm interested in, and do it in my spare time related to my subject? And I think with your personal statement, it's merely exploring that in writing, the things that you are interested in within your subject. So I guess just don't be afraid of writing, because writing the first few words you write are always the hardest. I did something which worked for me, which is I never deleted anything at all. So each time I'd make an edit, I just copy and paste it and just make a whole new thing. That works well for me because I was interested in everything I was writing, and I felt it was all useful. So rather than, some people write, I've had friends who wrote a whole personal statement and deleted it because it was like, no, that's not right, that's not good. Never get rid of what you're writing because it's genuine to you. You've written this thing. So if you don't think it's good, that's absolutely fine. Keep what you have and maybe start again, or look back at that paragraph on another day. But yeah, I'd say the main thing is just don't be disheartened. And at the end of the day, it should be a fun process. If you find that writing your personal statement isn't fun, you probably aren't touching on the things that are genuinely interesting for you, or maybe you don't have the right subject. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
Thanks, Darcy. Dave, what's your advice, personal statement wise? What are we looking for?
Well, so there's two questions. The advice on personal statements is, first of all, to remember it's not just for us. It's for 4 other applications, and the majority of people who apply to Oxford sadly don't get into Oxford, so it's got to be seriously tailored towards the variety of applications you've put in, and not just thought about as the personal statement for my Oxford application. And that's important in a number of ways. You've already heard of. We are going to look at some of your schoolwork. We're going to, for 2 of the 3 degrees that we've been talking about, we're going to be seeing your work in an admissions test. If we like what we see there, then the chances are we're going to actually meet with you in some form or other, possibly via a screen this year, but we're going to meet with you. So we've got lots of ways of making that personal dimension of personal statement actual for us without needing those 4,000 characters or whatever it is to be the thing that's going to count. So remember that, and don't think of the Oxford application as the only thing driving the personal statement. That's the first thing I'd say. Secondly, what are we looking for? And frankly, therefore, what is everybody going to be looking for, the other universities as well? First piece of advice on the UCAS website, but very good advice, is it's an academic personal statement. It's not personal in the sense of tell us all your passions outside of school and we'll let the UCAS forms subjects do all the rest. We want to hear from you about why you have made this application. For some people, that will be an interesting question to us because you're not doing anything in the theology, religion, Oriental studies, languages kind of package already. And if you're not doing those things already, what's got you to the point where you're thinking about this degree? That's important. Secondly, we're going to want to hear a little bit about how you think, and that's going to be multiply important for all the other universities who don't have the extra stuff, the test, the interview and everything. So a little bit about what you've been reading, or as Darcy said, lectures you may have gone to, the other things you've been doing. So say a little bit about them, but don't just build up a list, a sort of bullet point list of all of the things you've done. We'd rather hear about 2 or 3 things, even if there's something to back those up with. And this is how this made me change my mind. This is why I think that this book I've read is wrong. This is the thing I did after I had read this. I went to a lecture then about the subject, and I have thought a bit more about it, and this is the way that it's changed my thinking. Those things, which may anchor in stuff you're doing in school, but they may also anchor in stuff you've done outside of school. That's fine. That doesn't matter. It may anchor in a faith community you're part of. You may be Jewish or Muslim, and that may be part of your motivation for doing this, but you might be an atheist or an agnostic, and that might be relevant to your application, but it might not. All of that stuff, it won't play any part directly. I mean, whether you are part of a faith community or not plays no part whatsoever in our academic assessment of you, but it will play some part in your connecting your application to you. And the thought that you don't need to compare with other personal statements, which Darcy has mentioned, that's entirely right. That word personal absolutely means what it says on the tin, as they say. It's very important to make this something that helps us, and importantly, those other 4 universities probably that you're applying to, connect with you and your intellectual personality, your academic motivations, because those are the things we're thinking about. 4/5 of the statement UCAS suggest academic, could be more, doesn't have to be all of it. If you're interested in other things that don't connect to your application for this degree, so you're in a choir, you sing, you play guitar, that kind of stuff, well, that's also rounding out a picture of who you are. Some of the things you might do may be incredibly time demanding, and we won't learn from those things directly relevant to the degree, but they are relevant to your application because they tell us how busy you can be and still succeed academically across a range of stuff. There probably, for some people maybe watching, will be things that don't necessarily belong in the personal statement, but they are relevant to us. So if you have had caring responsibilities for a family member, if you've been ill for a period during your schooling, if you've overcome adversity or you've faced challenges that have meant that you've been able to be less connected with your studies than you might have been in the last year, home circumstances and poor internet will be among those things. They don't belong necessarily in the personal statement, but they probably do belong in the school reference. And anything that extra that would contextualize our understanding of you as you present yourself, that's something that the authentication of a school reference, something that the teacher has said, that's really important to us and to other universities. So please do take advantage of the personal statement to let us connect with you. And then the school should be encouraged to tell us everything else we need to know in their reference, not just that you are academically doing really well, but anything else that they'd want to tell us if we weren't to interview you or weren't to offer you a place. We'd like to know that now rather than later.
I'll echo that and say that one of the messages to come out of this is that there are things that you can do after this virtual open day that can help you to explore who you are academically and to pursue those academic interests that you have. And like we've heard, reading is a big part of it. We do a lot of reading on this course. If you are someone who has a proven track record in reading lots of stuff, that's a good thing, but it's not limited to reading. As we heard from Darcy, you can go to museums, you can go to lectures. At the moment, you can go to virtual lectures that there are universities wherever you are across the UK and across the world, and all of them to some extent will be trying to reach out and grab members of the public with the exciting things they're doing. Here in the UK, we're very lucky in that a lot of academic engagement at a certain level in terms of museums and things like Radio 4 is freely available, and you can access it. It doesn't cost you anything, but it might interest you a great deal, and it might be the springboard to really exploring something else. So if you're sat twiddling your thumbs through this live stream thinking, oh my good, well, I want to start my personal statement, but I don't really think I have anything to say, I don't really know who I am to present myself as, you have some time to think about what you might like to explore. And like Darcy said, don't delete anything. And by that, I mean, some students then find it useful. It's not compulsory and no one's going to check up on it, but some people find it useful to keep a little log of the things that they've been doing, because not only does that remind you how much you have done and how much you have thought about and how much you've read, but it also reminds you of your journey and how you got there. So I started reading this because my friend said that he thought it was rubbish. And so to be contrary, I thought I'd give it a go. And I read the first 3 pages and it took me 2 hours and I hated it. It's really hard. And that was a month ago. And now read a log from a month later and you find that actually you're now reading a chapter in an hour. You're really on board with it. You went and told your friend you liked it. You had a chat about it at lunch, so you can see how far you've come. And none of this gets copy pasted, but it helps you to reflect on what you're doing. We're not looking for particular things. We don't have a checklist like, oh, look, he's read Nietzsche, tick. It's not like that. It's about getting a picture of who you are academically. So we are winding down now. I've got a question about religion and Oriental studies. So I'd like to answer that one, and then we'll draw things to a close. So if you have any remaining questions, do get them in before the curtain falls. So we've been asked to say a little bit more about the religion and religions part of the Religion and Oriental Studies course. So this is a great exercise in terminology. Okay, so the Religion and Oriental Studies course, like the Philosophy and Theology course, is a combined degree. You take 2 bits and you click them together. Whereas theology and religion, as Dave said earlier, despite that and in the middle, that's actually all coming from one faculty. Now, within the one faculty of theology and religion and all the people that make it up and the subjects that make it up, there are some things that we study which most people would point to, and most people who teach it would point to and say, oh, that's theology and that's religious studies. But there's an awful lot where actually there's a great deal of debate as to where they fit. Different people approach them in different ways. And so theology and religion, we treat as the combined offering from our faculty. So although philosophy and theology is called philosophy and theology, as Darcy said, you're actually able to access the whole range of courses offered on theology and religion. So actually some of the courses Darcy might be studying are probably more like religious studies courses you might get than theology ones. Ditto, if you're doing religion and Oriental studies, the religion half of it refers to theology and religion, the bit that faculty delivers, and you would have access to all the papers that you might think of as theology. And it will be choosing from what the Faculty of Theology and Religion has to offer. And the question says, do we have to choose a specific religion when we start? Now, that's actually a question for the other side of the course. Religion and Oriental Studies students would be wise to give serious consideration to which religious tradition they would like to focus on for the Oriental Studies half of the course. Not for the religion, not for the theology and religion part of the course, where you've got pretty much a fairly free choice of the theology and religion options, but for the Oriental Studies half of the course, you're going to undertake a pretty serious program of language learning. And that language is tied to the religious tradition on which you choose to focus. So you will need to start your language classes pretty much from arrival. And so we need to know whether you want to learn Arabic, Hebrew, Greek, Hindi, Tibetan, Pali, Sanskrit. And so to know that connects with the religious specialism you're choosing for that side of the course. Now, it might be that you're struggling to choose, and it might be that you're pretty sure you want to study Sanskrit, but you haven't quite tied down whether it's going to be Sanskrit looking at Hinduism or Sanskrit looking at Buddhism. And it's fine to mention more than one thing, and it's fine to raise these questions with tutors. But it is a good idea, not for the theology and religion side of the course, but for the language-based portion of the Oriental Studies course, to have to give really serious consideration to which language you would like to focus on. And there is some scope for discussing that and changing that, but really you do want to hit the ground running once you're here, and we need to make sure that there are language classes available for you to do. So that's on that side of the course. I think let's wrap up by saying, I'll ask a straightforward question. It's maybe most straightforward for Darcy. Darcy, what do you wish you had known when you'd applied that you know now? What would you go back and tell yourself 3 years ago?
That's a hard question, Mary. What do I wish I'd known? I think I'd probably wish maybe to just be more relaxed in the process, because the more relaxed you are, you're really able to show your true colours, and be natural and be engaged. I think also in the interview process to really engage with the city, and really remember that as much as you're trying to, show the tutors you're a great candidate, they're also trying to get you here as well, and it's a two-way process. So I guess also remember that the colleges, the respective colleges and the city as well, is a place that you need to ask yourself whether you want, and it's a two-way process, and you're not just trying to sell yourself, but they're trying to also sell you to them. So I guess remembering in the interview process, and in other ways that you need to ask yourself whether this is something you want, and have genuine conversations with yourself about that. But that's a hard question. I don't know if that's a good answer.
Thanks, Darcy. I think it is a good answer, and I think it just shows the merit of the tutorial system in the interviews, in that I fire a difficult question at you, and you're used to dealing with that, and we see you think about it, and we see how you think, and you arrive at an answer that you explain beautifully. So there was a bit of what an interview looks like. Dave, I suppose I'd rephrase that one for you. What one piece of advice do you wish you could give to all candidates?
There's a lot of advice about the process, but I think it's important probably in a university that must be actually turning away maybe, overall on all the degrees, something like 7 candidates for every one we admit. I think I'd want to emphasize that Oxford is just one university. I think it offers, I would say honestly, as somebody who did not come here as an undergraduate, it offers, probably the best undergraduate experience in education in the world, because it is so directly engaged with the business of encouraging its undergraduates to think and to be themselves academically in the context of quite senior academics, teaching them often 1-to-1, certainly 1-to-2. So I think Oxford is to be aspired to for those who are ready for it. I think at 18 I probably wasn't. I didn't apply to Oxford. I went to Edinburgh and then went to Leeds, and I enjoyed those places very much. But I think I would probably have needed to be about 20 or 21 before I was mature enough to make the best of Oxford. So one thing is to emphasize with Darcy, think about whether this is for you. But the other is to say that there are many other very good universities, and most people who apply will not get in. And that's important to remember. Put your hat in the ring. Let us assess your application. But not being interviewed even, and certainly being interviewed and then not being given a place, you are still already standing out academically by having been in a position to put an application in. And I'd want to say, I think most of all, to the people who are thinking of applying, but then who are not going to be successful, it's not a kick in the teeth. It's not the end of academic and intellectual ambitions. Lots of people go to other universities, do really well there, and then end up at Oxford doing graduate work here, or even teaching here in years to come. So put the right kind of level of ambition in this. It's not what your life and its future meaning depend upon, but it is something important to give yourself as fully to us and to our process as you can. And then once you've done that, it may just be that there are 30 people who've applied for your course who are better than you in that year. But that's kind of in the world who have applied here. So for you to be in the frame is already a major plaudit. And I think I'd want to say that to everybody.
Thank you, Dave. Very, very wise advice there, I think, and good for students who at this stage already are thinking about making their application, who are coming to open days and trying to discern what's right for them. It's really good to have you all here and to have this time to think and consider and prepare. I don't want to congratulate you on coming to the live stream, but I do want to thank you very, very much for joining us. As I promised, if there are any questions left on the chat that we haven't addressed, I will type answers to those and leave them up. But I think we have managed to address all of them. So that's congratulations to Dave and Darcy, at least, for getting through those, and to thank them very much. I know that both of you will be on various Slidos throughout the afternoon, answering more questions either in college or at our faculty or other faculties. So I do hope everybody enjoys the rest of their virtual open day. Make the most of it. There's a lot going on, and hopefully it won't be so very long until actually visiting Oxford in person is a realistic prospect for everybody to come and see what it's actually like. So thank you very much, and have a good day.